So, who here plays the bass? Okay. Who's a musician, not a bass player, but another instrument? Okay. And who's just a music lover? Okay, 3. All right, perfect. All right. You got any musicians? Who plays drums? Help me out. Please. Thank you. It sounds like we rehearsed. Give it up for Simon on the drums. Simon sounds like Simon knew everything I was going to play before I played it, which makes me feel like I'm playing very, very predictable right now, Simon. Hey, if you guys have any questions, if somebody's brave enough to ask me the first question, that'll get me going. If I hear one question, I can talk a lot. So, anybody have anything they want to ask? Who wants to go first? It gets much more comfortable as we go on, but I need somebody to start it. Okay, so yes. Did I see anybody? Okay, I'll ask myself a question. I'm from New York City and born in Brooklyn. At 10, I moved to Queens. It's only like 30 minutes different. The place I lived in Queens is called Jamaica, Queens. And if you've ever flown into New York City and you landed at Kennedy Airport, JFK, you landed in Jamaica, Queens, right? Incredible neighborhood with a lot of young musicians. And Jamaica was really cool because in the Bronx, which is another part of Manhattan, no one has basements. You guys know what a basement is? Like the room underneath? There were not so many basements in the Bronx, not so many basements in Queens, in Brooklyn, excuse me, but in Queens, everybody had a basement. So the parents of the kids, they loved it because they could put some instruments down in the basement, and that way they knew where their kids were. Their kids weren't getting in any trouble, and it was great for the kids to have something to do. So I came up in that environment. Started playing the clarinet first because that's the instrument that they offered in school. Trumpet, drums, or clarinet. I wanted to play the drums, but my father said no. Because we lived in a small apartment and he wasn't about to have to hear all the drums. So he wanted something quiet. So I played the clarinet, you know. And I played the clarinet from 10 years old, but very soon after that I heard Michael Jackson and his brothers, the Jackson 5, right? And like I was 10, Michael was 10. I was like, oh, I want to be that dude, right? And the music they were playing, if you listen to their records, it turns out it was that incredible rhythm section from Motown called the Funk Brothers. I thought it was the Jackson 5 playing their own instruments, but it turns out to be James Jamerson on the bass, and who else? Stevie Wonder played a little bit, Wilton Felder, Wah Wah Watts, and all these great musicians who played for the Funk Brothers. So although I was listening to Michael Jackson and his brothers sing, I realized I was absorbing that classic music of Motown, right? James Jamerson's incredible bass player. You know James Jamerson's bass lines, right? He'd be like come on, man. Where you at? Where's Simon? Okay, come on. So you get the idea, right? So Jamerson was a bad dude, right? He played only with one finger. Thank you. Did you recognize that song just from the bass? No, I know a couple of people recognize that song just from the bass. But anyway, Jamerson, he started playing the contrabass. And when he moved to electric bass, he continued to only play with one finger, right? So he would play like, I can't do it, but I don't know how he did it. But he had, and they called it the claw, you know, he played with the claw. Anyway, he was very influential. Every bass player in the late 60s and early 70s, they played like Jamerson, right? And then I heard, who was the next guy I heard? You guys heard of this group called Tower of Power? Yeah. Tower of Power was bad. You know? And they were known for their horns, because they had a really incredible horn section. But the bass player was bad too. Simon, you ready?
I am. Hit me up.
1, 2, 3. So he played a lot of notes like that was Rocco's thing. And then I heard Larry Graham. And Larry Graham, he had a group with his mom. It was a gospel group. And it was just 3 of them. His mom played the organ, so she played the bass with her feet on the pedals. And Larry played the guitar, and they had a drummer. And one day, Mom's pedals broke. So Larry switched temporarily to bass, just until the pedals were repaired, right? So now he's playing bass, and then the drummer quit. The drummer quit, so Larry was like, okay, I need a beat, right? So he started, instead of playing the regular way, he decided to recreate the drums with his bass, so he started going. Replacing the drums. And although he knew that you weren't really allowed to play the bass like that, Although he knew those were against the rules, he figured I'm just playing the bass temporarily, so I don't really care, right? So he started playing like this. He played. Okay, and then it turned out that the pedals were not able to be fixed. They were really, really broken. And so Larry got stuck on the bass. I don't think he ever really considered, it took him maybe years to admit that he was now a bass player. He was always, trying to get back to the guitar. But consequently, he came up with this style. And Sly, who was a DJ in the Oakland Bay Area, he started a band and asked Larry to be in the band. And the next thing you know, Larry's playing bass lines like. We were kids. I was like 13 or 14 when that record came out. And I was like, what is that, right? It sounded like two guitars. And then somebody said, dude, that's a bass. I was like, that's a bass? Because there were no videos. There was no YouTube. Sly and the Family Stone wasn't on TV. So you had to just imagine what he was doing. So everybody who played bass at that time, they came up with their own version. So some guys were like, everybody was doing different things, right? Because you didn't know how it was happening, Eventually, maybe he would come to your city, but we were too young to afford a ticket to go see him. So it wasn't until years later that I got to see what he was doing, right? But in the meantime, the good part about that was you ended up coming up with things on your own. Like, you thought you were playing like Larry Graham or James Jamerson, and it turns out you weren't, but it turns out you came up with your own thing in the process. So it was very cool. Okay, so Larry Graham, very important, as y'all know, because I'm known for slapping. Then I heard Stanley Clarke, right? And Stanley Clarke was incredible because he started off also as an upright bass player. And unlike Jamerson, Stanley kept the power in his plucking of the upright bass, which you're not supposed to do. When you play electric bass, you're supposed to play a little lighter. But Stanley did not, so he's. Very obnoxious, right? Very rude. But for young kids, we were like, I want to play like that. You know what I mean? Because, if you're a young kid, you gravitate towards the more aggressive, especially if you're a young boy. You go for the more aggressive stuff. So Stanley did stuff like. Very important. Then I heard Jaco Pastorius. You guys know Jaco, right? And Jaco was completely different. And I have to admit, when I first heard him, I didn't get it because it wasn't so aggressive sounding. The sound was more like I was like, what is that? I want something that hits you over the head, But as I grew to really appreciate him and his musicality, and I grew to appreciate his composition because he wrote really beautiful things for the bass. Don't ever change your strings right before a show. found things that sounded beautiful on the bass. Stanley Clarke too. And that was something that I think was very important because a lot of bass players, they listened to Jaco and he started playing, they said, you know what, it sounds like he's playing saxophone licks and he's playing piano licks, so I'm gonna learn saxophone licks and piano licks. But Stanley and Jaco found things that sounded good on the bass, things like so big intervals, not this, but this. That sounds really nice on the bass. So those guys taught me, find something that works on your instrument. So I really worked to do that. So where am I? Jaco. After Jaco, I had a buddy in high school. He's a great drummer. His name is Omar Hakim. Has anybody heard of Omar Hakim? Yeah, so we were classmates, and Omar was an incredible drummer. The way, if you've heard Omar, that's how he played in high school, or at least to my ears. He played the same way, like he was that advanced, and I was just totally in awe of him, so I used to just kind of hang with him. We started a band together when we were in high school. Anyway, one day Omar says, okay, man, we're not going to listen to any other players anymore. I said, what do you mean? He said, you know how you listen to Stanley and Jaco and Larry Graham? I said, yeah. He said, we're going to stop doing that. I said, why would we ever want to do that? And he said, because we have to find our own thing, right? I said, why do we have to find our own thing? Because, you know, in high school, if you're a high school musician and you can play like Jaco Pastorius or you can play like Stanley Clarke, that's pretty impressive to most people. But Omar was so far advanced, he said, we're not going to be in high school for the rest of our lives, right? And at some point, you know, and Omar introduced me to all these bad musicians in Jamaica, Queens, the area where we grew up that I was telling you about. He introduced me to the top musicians in the area. And I quickly realized that what made them incredible was that, let's say there was a jam session at the club, and you drove up to the club 3 blocks away from the club, and you could tell who was at the jam session because you could tell Tom Brown had his own sound and Omar had his own sound. And I said, yeah, that's what it's really about. That's not necessarily what every musician wants, but that's what I decided I wanted. So what really cemented it, what really made it real for me was I was 19 years old and I was playing with a singer named Roberta Flack, right? Beautiful singer, right? And I was in Los Angeles at a hotel and my phone rang. And I said, hello. And the guy said, hello, Marcus, this is Jaco Pastorius. I'm in room 226. Get up here and get your lesson, right? I was like, man, this dude is arrogant, right? As I was grabbing my bass to go up to 226 to get my lesson, right? And I went up, man, and he was like, it was him and his wife. And he was so cool when he says, here, play something. I'm like, oh, man. He hands me his bass, and I go, because I was really into Jaco Pastorius at the time, I said, am I going to stand here in front of Jaco Pastorius and play his licks to him? I don't think there's anything more stupid than that, right? So at that point, I decided, no, I'm not going to do that. So I played more like where I was at in Jamaica, Queens. You know, I was like not with that sound, not with the Jaco sound. And Jaco grabbed the bass from me. He says, I can do that. I just don't. And I said, oh, maybe I got Jaco Pastorius a little defensive. Whoa, I think I like this. You know, I mean, of course, he was still the genius, and I looked up to him so much. But just to know that I had something that was really separate from him was a good feeling. You know what I mean? And then I got a call soon after that to play with Miles Davis. And at that point, I said to myself, this is a really important recording that I'm about to play on. I don't want to waste this opportunity sounding like somebody else. I got to find my own thing. So Y'all didn't ask me any questions, and look, I just talked for half an hour, okay? So come on, give me another question to keep me going, please.
Actually, have a lot of questions.
All right.
So actually, it's not even from me. I don't know if you know, we're live streaming this now on YouTube. So there's lots of YouTubers
What's up,
out there.
YouTube?
Yeah, they have lots of questions. Laura is actually mitigating all the questions here on her laptop.
Oh, okay.
But of course, in person trumps. So we got somebody here.
Yes, hi Marcus.
Hey, how you doing?
Fine, thank you. I would like to know if you have a setup routine for your sound check and how you tune in your sound on the room. So not every room is like capable like this.
This is a nice room, right?
Yes.
I was just in a room a couple of nights ago that wasn't a nice room, you know? Like you played the note and then you could hear the note ringing for like 3 seconds. And I was telling somebody the other day, especially in Europe, if I hear a guy go, "We have for you, Marcus, the most wonderful hall in all of Europe," I get nervous right away, right? Because what that usually means is that it's a classical hall, right? Which was created to amplify acoustic instruments, right? Thank you very much. I'll take that right now. You know what I mean? So if you play the oboe, it's perfect. And the sound just kind of blossoms in the hall. But if you play electric bass, it's horrible. You know what I mean? It's like playing in a gymnasium, as you probably know. So what do? Well, a lot of it comes to EQ and volume, okay? And a lot of bands, when they're in a bad room, their instinct is to just play so loud that it overpowers the room, and that never works. You actually have to back off and work with the room. You can't fight it, okay? So we'll try to play softer, you know what I mean? Not softer, but because that implies less intensity. We try to play with the same intensity, but just less. And also your EQ, okay? So if you're playing the bass guitar, right? If you're playing the bass guitar, you've got your frequencies, right? So here's like one of the lowest sounds, the deepest sounds I can make. If you're watching on YouTube, put some headphones on, man, because the bass doesn't sound very good on your little speakers, okay? But anyway. So that's a deep sound. But even in this room, did you hear how one note exploded on me? Check it out. Can you hear that? That's cool. That's what you check for. So you say to the engineer, man, like around, let's see, that's probably around 160. You know, you find the frequency and you ask him to pull that out because something about this room resonates on my D natural, right? So that's what we do at sound check. It's called ringing the hall. You find the notes that ring, right? And then if you want more clarity, you add more mid-range to the bass, okay? So check it out. That's no mid-range. You hear that? It's not a pretty sound, right? But what it does in a bad hall is it gives the bass some clarity. I don't turn it all the way up like I do now, but I add some mid-range to give it some definition, right? And if you're playing maybe with your pickups, if you have 2 pickups on your bass, maybe you'll think about using more of this pickup than that pickup. Okay, so those of you who don't play the bass, listen to the sound of this pickup, which is under this metal thing. It just looks just like that, but it's underneath. Check out the sound. Woo! We go to another key. There you go. That's the sound of this pickup. It's throaty and it's deep and round, right? Here's this pickup. Listen to the difference. A little bit more nasal, right? So this is the tight frequency. This is the wide frequency. Why? Because the string vibrates really tiny here and it vibrates larger here, right? So I can use all back pickup and be like, a lot of definition, but it's kind of like nasally. And if you play in a reggae band or you play in a Latino band, you will get fired if you use only this sound. I made a mistake one time in high school. And they said, man, if you don't put some bass in that bass, man, we're gonna kick you. So I learned very quickly. But what you can do, rather than use all of that back pickup, you just go towards it a little bit. Here's both pickups on equally. I gotta get out of this key because the room's getting. So now I'm just gonna go towards this back up a little bit. I'm gonna go blend it in a little bit out here. Too much. Add a little bit more. So you have to experiment with that at your sound check to make sure that you can find a sound that you can live with. You know what I mean? I can't go all back pickup all the time because I'm known for a fuller sound. But we do that. And then once I'm cool, once everybody's cool, then we play a couple of songs to see how it works. Yes?
So you're mostly working on your bass? You're
No.
working on the bass and not on the amp?
Oh, I was a studio musician for 25 years, right? He asked, I don't know if you heard him, he said, so you're working mostly from your bass? First of all, I was a studio musician for 25 years and never used an amp, right? In New York City, the sessions were happening too fast for a bass player to be fiddling with his amp. So what they did was they took the bass direct. The guitar players were allowed to use an amp because their guitar sounded horrible without an amp, right? But bass, so that's one issue. Another issue is when I'm doing big concerts, the only one who hears my amp is me, right? The main sound is coming from those two gigantic speaker systems. That's what the audience is hearing. So I can fool around with my amp all I want, right? But the sound has to come, the sound that you're gonna hear. In a room like this, you're hearing my amp, but if it's a bigger place, like 2,000, 3,000 people, you have to use a combination, you know? I have a microphone, usually on my speaker cabinets too, to blend in, but the engineer blends it, okay? So the engineer, for me, takes, sorry if I'm getting too technical, but the engineer takes 3 signals from me. He takes right off the bass, so one track of his, when he's sitting in the middle of the house, you know, he has those faders. One fader is just my straight, direct bass. The next fader comes out of my pedals. And then the third fader is the amp. And the engineer is constantly trying to find the right balance between the 3. But for me, I'm known for my direct sound, so he usually has a good amount of direct signal in there. Okay, next question.
Give us a slow motion of your triplets.
Slow motion of my triplets. Well, they're usually not triplets, right? They're 30 seconds, right? Because triplets to me aren't that funky, you know what I mean? But like, can I get a beat, man? Can I get like... Simon!
Now everything is ruined.
So, 2, 3. Check out triplets. Keep going, keep going. Here's triplets. That's not funky like this. Here's funky. Man, Simon's on it, man. He's on it. So if the beat is here, right? Triplets are like this. 30 seconds are like. So to me, it doesn't interrupt the flow as much. I'll play triplets from time to time, but I know I'm breaking the rhythm up, so I use it for that effect. But when I just want to really try to keep it grooving but do something with more intensity, I'll throw in the 30 seconds, okay? Now, so you got to practice drum paradiddles. Drummers practice that all the time because you want your accent to come out on the note you want. So sometimes you have to double up. Like you have to go. So if you practice that without any notes, just dead notes, and just practice your rhythm. Okay, so that's usually what I use, and most of it's just back and forth. But sometimes you use your thumb like a pick, right? Okay, so or you can do, just think about Victor Wooten, you know? You can do. Right? So it just becomes your creativity and how much time you want to spend doing something that nobody else in your band is going to like. Right? Piano plays like, okay, here he goes again, So the problem now for me is that a lot of guys are like really into that. And to me, that was just, when I did a gig with like somebody like David Sanborn, I was playing straight bass for like an hour and a half. And then I had a solo. I played a solo, and the solo's the only thing that they put on YouTube. You know what I mean? Or even on my own gigs, I'm trying to really play a wide range of music, a wide range of bass. But the only thing that the YouTube is like me just going crazy. So what happens is that a lot of young players are missing like the fundamentals, and they're not getting gigs, and they don't understand why, And it's really a matter of who you want to be. You know what I mean? You can be a guy who does that, and that's cool, and you probably could be successful, like just doing videos in your bedroom and getting a lot of hits. Hey, a lot of people are actually making a pretty good living these days doing that, you know what I mean? But if you are interested in making music, you know, you really have to, this whole thing right here, it's really all about that, you know, that relationship, you know. When Simon and I are playing, look, I don't even know Simon's last name, okay? But as soon as we start playing, he's like, I got you, you know what I mean? And then when he was soloing, I was like, I got you, don't worry. You know, you play something, I'm gonna add, I'm gonna support you. Like human interaction, what about that, right? Right? But that doesn't mean that when it's your turn that you don't go crazy and like, you know. I never like making choices, you know what I mean? But I think that as you get older, you start to appreciate that, you know what I mean? Like, and if you start listening to music around other people who aren't musicians, that's very good for you. You know what I mean? If you're a young musician, just to see what music does in the real world, you know, and how it affects people and what makes people feel good. Sometimes it's not all of that, you know what I mean? So it's funny coming from me because a lot of people think that that's all I do. But man, I'm on like 500-600 records. A lot of records you don't even know it's me because all I was doing what was necessary for the record. Mariah Carey, Whitney Houston, Donald Fagen, all sorts of stuff. And again, if they gave me an opportunity, I jump right back then into the pocket, right? Anybody heard of Luther Vandross, the singer? Yeah. Okay, I did a lot of records with Luther. We were really good friends. We wrote a lot of music for Aretha Franklin. We wrote music for Luther himself. And on a lot of his recording sessions, the music was really sparse. Like the drummer wasn't even allowed to play like this. He had to play like this. So much space, like you didn't even know when the next beat was coming. You know what I mean? Can you do that, Simon? Just like quarter notes on the hi-hat. Go. Turn the mic off for a second, please. That's what a Luther Vandross record recording date sounded like. Just add a piano to that, right? And Luther would be in the booth just singing, man. And when he put his voice on top of that, it sounded so beautiful because there was so much space for all the beautiful things that he was singing to come through. And in fact, there's one record where we got to the end of the record, and instead of ending the record, we just continued to vamp. And he was improvising, he was singing some beautiful stuff. And when we hit the groove, he said to the band, keep it right there, keep it right there. Don't mess this groove up, keep it right there. All you Marcus, Yogi, don't add nothing to this. Keep it right there. But he didn't say, he said, keep it right there, keep it right. He was singing it, so that it sounded like the song. And when you listen to the song, he left it in there. He left that part in there, his instructions to us. And people thought, you know, he's talking to his girlfriend or something. Keep it right there, baby. Nah, he was saying, I don't want none of you jazz guys in the band messing this groove up, okay? But we learned that he didn't have to tell us, you know, because it was very clear that that was all that was necessary, you know? So it becomes about who you want to be. It becomes about how important it is for you to support other musicians, you know? And that's something I think you come to with time, you know? Okay, what else?
I wanted to it seemed like interaction is something that is interesting, and we actually have a keyboarder and another bassist who would love to jump on stage. They prepared some songs to play with you.
Come on, interactors, come on.
Come on. Julia, come on.
Hey, how you doing?
Oh my god.
What's your name? Nice to meet you. Hello. You okay?
Yes.
All right, come on now. We got an amp? Another amp? Oh, yeah, you got two. Okay. Which one? Is this mine?
This is
Is it yours?
no. This is yours.
And you're gonna play through this one? Don't be nervous. We're just gonna have fun. Okay? What key? Give me a key. Just give me one note. Come on. Don't pick D. It doesn't sound good. Okay. Hey, give it up for Julia. Woo! Okay, now, what did you hear? Julia came, she wasn't trying to take my head off, right? She came in cool, she said, let's have a conversation first. Most of the guys who get up here, they try to take my head off, you know? Because they come in with all that fire. Julia started, man, and we made music. And then when it was time, he said, that's very beautiful. Thank you very much. And give it up for Oliver on the piano, on the keyboards. Oliver said, okay, I know what kind of gig this is. This is like one of them bass gigs, so I'm just gonna like lay in the cut. Thank you very much. We got anybody else who wants to play? Bass players? We got one here? Oh, you, yourself. Oh, all right, come on, man. Is that your bass, Julia? Sounds nice. What is it? Fenders? What is it?
It's like a Fender.
Yeah. Doesn't her bass sound good? Now, what do you got, man? Uh-oh. Come on, Simon. I'm nervous already, man. I know
Me
you.
too, man. Don't know what to expect. Can I get an A?
Yeah, I could use one too. Can we get an A, Oliver? A.
Can we get one?
I want to say thank you to Sire Bass for putting this all together. Give it up for Sire Bass, y'all. Also want to thank Mark Bass for supplying the amplifiers. Give it up for Mark Bass. Okay, man, you started off.
I gotta start it off.
You got to start it off, yes.
All right. You wanna play something, one of your songs, or?
Whatever you got. If it's one of my songs, I hope I remember it. Go on, man. I'll figure it out if I don't remember it.
I gotta remember it. Just play one. I don't even remember which ones we did. Yeah. That one was in B flat.
So while we're playing, turn off all the microphones, so that might help it make more clear, okay? So it's hard for the bass to improvise, isn't it? Usually because when the bass starts improvising, nobody's playing the bass. So how do you do that? So I was thinking, maybe if I play a bass line as my solo, so that I have a solo, but the bass too. Okay, now we're going to develop our ears. Keep going. We're going to develop our ears by trading, okay? When you're playing by yourself, you can play with anything you want. But if you trade, you have to answer what the other person did. So it forces you to play something specific, right? So we're going to trade, and we're going to exercise our ears, okay? Guess who's starting off? So that made them stretch, right? Because man, like, I never played that lick before, right? Let me figure it out, right? And it opens you up, it forces you. I was telling somebody the other day, when we were kids, we would put our instruments down and we would have battles, scat battles, where we were just scatting solos. Oh yeah? It's just trying to exercise your imagination, right? Because sometimes we're limited by what we can get to, right? Limited by what you can play, what you already know how to play, right? So if you're scatting or if you hear something that somebody played and you say, I gotta answer that, I gotta reply, it makes you find things that you wouldn't ordinarily find, right? That makes sense? The other thing is, when we practice, don't practice in the same tempo all the time. If you practice in the same tempo, when we play a little lazy New Orleans groove like this, you're gonna be rushing the beat because you're not used to playing. You're used to going, right? So you find your licks, you find yourself like, where am I? I can't find the beat. That's because you sped ahead of everybody, okay? We're gonna play that groove one more time, and we're gonna focus. You really need to be relaxed when you're playing this groove, right? Because it's New Orleans and it's really hot outside. You know what I mean? It's kind of like it is right now here, okay? All right, let's change the key. Let's go to C minor. Microphones, please. Thanks. Okay. We'll work with it. Okay. So play a groove, all right, and lay in the pocket, okay? Okay, C's not gonna work. Try E. Nope. We got a ring on this bass drum. Does anybody else hear that, or is it just me? Do you hear that? Can we get rid of that? Because we can't hear what we're playing. You hear that sound? Guess what note it is? It's that same D. Okay, come on, let's play this groove. You know, some musicians use external influence to fall into the pocket. We're not going to do that. We're just going to naturally. I did say C, didn't I? Sorry. All right. Give it up for these guys, man. All right. All right. Thank you. So, any more questions? Any other? My first bass looked like B.B. King's guitar, like a Gibson 335 shape. It was by a company called Univox. I think they're still around. Anyway, that was my first bass, and I played it for about a year, 2 years. And then my first like really kind of high quality bass was a Fender Jazz bass, like 1974. And played that for a few years. I went to college. I went home to get my instruments for jazz rehearsal at college. I put the amp in the trunk. I put the speaker in the trunk. And then I drove away and left the bass on the side of the car. I drove 45 minutes to my school, unpacked the stuff and said, oh no. Drove home, that was gone. So I lost that bass. Went to my mom. She pulled out another $275 and bought me the second bass, second jazz bass. Had that for 6 months. It was in my car. I ran upstairs just to get something. And I think a John Coltrane song was playing on the radio. And I got lost in the John Coltrane song and stayed there longer than I should have. And I came down, okay, that bass is gone. Okay. So now it's 1977. The third one, I held on to that sucker like this. Okay. And I played it like every record that you heard me on, it's that bass, the 1977 Fender Jazz bass. I played it all along. I didn't do any concerts. I played different fretless basses, but my fretted bass was pretty much for the 40 years, the Fender Jazz bass. I just started playing the Sires just because we were trying to introduce a model for students, inexpensive but good quality bass for students. And the guys at Sire who come from Korea, they were like, man, we can make a really great quality bass and not charge so much for it. And I thought that was really cool because parents were always asking me, you know, my son, my daughter, they want to play bass, but I don't want to spend a lot of money and then have them decide they'd rather do video games than practice the bass. So we released the Sire bass, and the young musicians really liked it, but what we didn't know was that all the older guys loved it too because the quality is so good. So next thing we knew, we had this whole like crazy phenomenon going on. And thank you to Thomann because they were the first ones to pick up on the Sire bass. You know, a lot of the other companies around the world were a little hesitant, you know what I mean, to try a new model of bass. But Thomann got on really early and helped us do this thing. So I play this, but you know, when you come to my concert, you're gonna see me still playing the bass that my mom bought me, number 3, because I think that was kind of, in my own stupid way, I was trying to find the perfect bass for me. You know what I mean? And I found it. You know that's not the reason. The stupid part is correct. Any other questions? Hmm? You mean the color? Yeah, you know, the first one was Sunburst, you know, Fender Standard, and so was the second. By the third one, I decided maybe I need to change something. So I got, you know, a natural color, and that was it. You know, I was a studio musician. I'll get to you in a second. I was a studio musician for many years in New York, and there was a difference between the California studio musicians in Los Angeles and the New York musicians. In California, all the studios were on the ground floor, right? Because it's more open. And all the musicians, they had, what do they call them? Cartage guys, cartage companies, roadies, who would bring all of your instruments from one session to the other, right? So, you know, there were studio bassists who had 5 or 6 basses, and the roadie guy would just bring them to the next session. And so he would go, for this song, I think I'm gonna play this bass. For this song, but in New York, first of all the studios were on the 32nd floor, and it's all, you know, cramped and old stairways and all old small elevators. So in New York, we didn't have that whole cartage thing happening. You had to carry your instrument. So we didn't have 6 basses. You know, we had to find one bass that worked for all situations, or almost all situations. And 99% of that time, it was a bass, like a jazz bass, because it has 2 pickups, and I was showing you about the different sounds you can get. So it didn't really matter what kind of session you found yourself on. It could be Frank Sinatra, or it could be like LL Cool J. It didn't matter. You had a bass that could do it all. So I've been kind of partial to the jazz bass style for that reason. Precision bass, which is the other really famous Fender bass, has 1 pickup. And from like 1962 to 1972, 1973, just about every bass you heard, bass guitar was a Fender Precision. That's kind of like the defining sound for bass guitar. But you better like that sound, because it doesn't make any other sound. You know what I mean? Fender Precision is like a Fender Precision. So it was funny because in just about every studio in New York, the engineer would keep a Fender bass behind him. It was just there. And the bass player would come to the session with his bass made from exotic wood, and it would have 17 strings. And you know, he's playing the scales and stuff. And they start the track. And then the producer would always say, that sounds great. Can we try it with the Fender? You know? Because, you know, something about the Fender bass, it didn't always sound great by itself, but in a track, it just was perfect. It sat right like between the bass drum and the keyboards really clearly. You know what I mean? It was just magic, and they got it right the first time, you know? And it's funny, man, because I just did a few sessions just like a couple of months ago. You know, I don't do that many outside sessions more, but I did a session, and the engineer was sitting there, and behind him, he had a Sire bass. I was like, oh, shucks now. I think that's a good sign. So I'm sorry, you had a, where is he?
Okay, yeah, I just very quickly, you were, I was very interested in hearing, you know, your development as a musician and finding your voice, and then you stopped at Miles. And I'd really love to hear
Sure, yeah.
what that was like.
Well, I was 21, and Miles Davis hadn't played a note in public for 5 or 6 years at that time. We didn't know if he was alive. You know, he went to his house and he never came out, you know. It's like a dark period for him. And so we started hearing rumors that maybe Miles might make a comeback, but none of us took it seriously because we hadn't seen him. I was on a record date with a singing group. I don't remember the singing group, and I got a note that said, call Miles Davis, right? It was from the receptionist at the studio, call Miles. I was like, this is probably my friend Yogi playing a joke on me, but I'm gonna call. And of course it was Miles Davis, and he said, can you be at a recording session at Columbia Studios, famous Columbia Studios? Can you be at recording session at Columbia Studios? And I went, yeah, when? He said, in an hour. Right? I said, I'll beat it. Is this really you? That's really what I wanted to know. Is this really you? He said, yeah, motherfucker. And he called me an MF. And I said, oh, okay, I guess that really is Miles, you know? And so I went to the session, man, and it was like, it's incredible. It's incredible to meet somebody who's really truly a legend. You know, first of all, I was looking up in the sky for him to float through the room, you know? But he was all down here, he was like that tall, you know? I'm like, you really Miles, you know? But man, you know what I learned? He didn't act like a genius. He just was a genius. You know what I mean? Like he wasn't going, what would I do now if I was a genius? You know? He was just doing what came natural to him, you know? For instance, he was the biggest jazz musician in the world in the 1950s, right? When he did a gig, you look in the audience and you saw Frank Sinatra, and you saw Ava Gardner, all the movie stars came to check out Miles. He was the man, right? And then in 1961, he said, it's time to change. Now, how many people do you know who are at the top of the world and they go, it's time to change, right? So he changed. Everybody was like, I can't believe Miles doesn't have that great band from the 50s. Who did he find? Herbie Hancock, Wayne Shorter, Tony Williams, and Ron Carter. And he created another incredible band, right? They played together for about 6 or 7 years. Then Miles is walking around hearing Jimi Hendrix and James Brown, and he's going, I'm going to change again, right? And he didn't fire Herbie and the guys right away. They came to the session for what was going to be like their 6th or 7th album. But Herbie said, where's the piano? And Miles said, you're going to play that. It was an electric piano, right? And Herbie says, that's a toy. That's not real, is it? You know? And Miles said, just shut up and play it, you know? Of course, Herbie found something magical to play. And eventually, Herbie left and Wayne left, and Miles ended up in this whole new period with electric instruments and kind of helped spearhead the fusion movement, okay? So it wasn't like he sat around going, what's the coolest thing I can do right now? What's the move I can do that's going to surprise everybody? No, it was just very honest. You know, I'm tired of this. I want to do that, you know? And watching him, being around him, I saw that. And I realized, okay, took me a while to understand, you know? The other thing I noticed from him was that people always asked him to go back and play his old style. They said, man, I love what you did in the 50s, Miles, you know? And I even said to him, man, what do you think about all these young musicians who are doing so well playing in your style from 15 years ago? He says, man, I can't wear them clothes anymore, right? He said, I can't wear those clothes anymore, right? Because for him, playing the music from 15 years ago is like putting on the clothes that you used to wear 15 years ago, you know what I mean? Or like if you just showed up with a flat top afro, you know what I mean? It's like, not now, you know? So for him, that's what music was. It was simply a reflection of the times, of the moment. Not every musician believes that. You know, you got some musicians who've been doing what they did at 22 years old for the rest of their life. And it's beautiful, and people are really happy to hear it. So I'm not saying this is what everybody should do, but it was really incredible to see that mind, that mentality at work. You know what I mean? He was just naturally creative, you know. He went to a opera ballet, and it was an African opera, and they were using thumb pianos, kalimbas, you know, and he's there with his wife, and the next day they had a recording session, and he says, you know what, instead of having all these complicated harmonies, let's just have one chord, like the thumb piano. And then we're just gonna move up a half step. Then we're gonna move back down, right? Just from being inspired by this ballet that he saw. And that became a song called So What. You guys know So What? That's one of the first songs in jazz that stayed in one chord. Before that it was dun, 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 dun. So What, you know, they called it modal jazz, you know, but it was Miles being inspired by this thing. He didn't think it was a big deal. He just wanted to try something new, you know. So that was very inspiring. Also, the last thing I'll tell you about Miles is that he was really an expert at being Miles, which sounds weird, but for us, for the rest of us, for Tony Williams, Herbie Hancock, you know, John McLaughlin, all the guys, Chick Corea, we had a hard time. I'm speaking for all of them. I might be speaking out of turn, but it really took a lot of concentration to find yourself after being with Miles. Do you know what I mean? Because his personality was so strong, and you thought, in order for me to be creative, I have to be creative like that. And it took me a while to learn, no, you got to find your own way. Miles never spoke. He had an operation on his vocal cords when he was in his 20s, and the doctor said, don't speak for a week. And of course, he cursed somebody out that night, you know? And for the rest of his life, he talked like this, right? So he didn't speak that much. And for a lot of my first years when I was doing my solo stuff, I didn't talk to the audience. I just played like him. And then one day I realized, I'm not Miles, my voice works, you know? Maybe I'm gonna tell the audience what this song is about. And it really opened up a whole new world for me, you know what I mean? Communicating with the music, you know what I mean? So everyone has to find that thing, and sometimes if you play with as strong a personality as Miles, sometimes it's even harder to find that thing. Thank you. Thank you. We got time for a couple more questions. Got time for a couple of more.
Maybe one more question.
How many bases you got?
I got a lot of bases. I got, well, probably about 40, right? And a lot of them are sires because they send them to me to check out the new model, and I have to make comments, maybe suggestions. But I have a bunch of Fender basses, 1977, that year. I have a couple of 1974s, thinking maybe I found that one that I left outside my car, And then I have a bunch of others that I like to experiment with and see what's going on. But it's funny because I always end up with the same bass on stage, you know what I mean? So, but it's still nice to have a bunch and fool around. Oh, all right, Simon, come on.
Can you tell us a little bit about the relation between the bass player and the drummer?
Yeah, I was about to talk about that, the relationship between the bass and the drums. So for me, the bass player is the guy who connects the drummer to the rest of the music. You know what I mean? Like the drums are rhythm, piano's harmony, and the bass is like rhythmic harmony. You know what I mean? So the bass says, okay, look, drummer, I'd like you to meet the piano player, with the bass line. And there's so many different things you can do, but you probably experience the same thing the other way around. But when I was a studio musician in New York, I had to figure out each drummer, because each one has a little thing that they do differently. And one of the things that they do differently is ba-boom. Just that little thing, ba-boom. Because the bass player always has the matching. Doom, 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 ba-boom, da-boom, boom, da-dum, ba-boom. And one drummer goes doom 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 ba boom, doom 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 ba boom. The other one goes doom 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 ba boom. You hear the difference? No, you don't. But it's a big difference. Once if you do that all day long for like 10 years, you know what I mean? Where do you put the first note of the ba boom? You can go ba boom or you can go ba boom, right? And it depends on the way the guy's foot works or something. I don't know. But I have to learn that, right? My job, and you can tell me what your job, what you feel like your job is. My job, I feel like if the drummer starts smiling when we're playing, then that means I'm doing the right thing. That means I'm supporting him. I'll tell you, I was playing with a group, really famous group. I can't mention the name because of the story, right? I was playing with a famous group, and this was a group that I had been listening to for like my whole teenage years, okay? And they finally gave me a call. We want you to play with the blah, blah, blah group. And I was like, now I know that when I was listening to the records, I had noticed that every 8 bars, the drummer speeds up. Right? He gets excited, but they were a group and they had all grown up together, so they all kind of naturally fell into that. But every bass player who would play with this group, and the bass player, that they went through a bunch of bass players, you know, to the point where they go, man, they're really hard on bass players, you know. So I said, all right, here we go. So we started playing bar 7, and then bar 8, and then fall back into it, right? So I was like, yep, that's it. I knew he was gonna do it. I knew he was gonna do it. And after the take, he goes, man, we play good together. And I was like, no, I play good with you, okay? You ain't changing nothing. I'm working back here, you know? So, but making the drummer, making everything work together, figuring out what he does. When we did the Luther Vandross records, I would purposely set up to where I could see Yogi's foot, actually see his foot, because we were playing so open so you couldn't hear or which would let you know where the next beats are coming. No, it's just that's a lot of space in between. And I wanted to lock with his bass drum, so I would just sit myself, I just watch his foot go. All right, there we go. And we didn't have sequencers and we didn't have Pro Tools. So, you know, you had to actually play as close to perfect as you could get. Now it doesn't matter. You know, you go to do a Dr. Dre session, you play, you say, man, can I do that again? He says, nah, man, I'm gonna fix it. I'm gonna fix it, don't worry. And when the record comes out, it's everything's perfect, you know what I mean? But back in the day, you had to like actually play it, so what is your, come up, man, get a mic. Tell me what the drummer does, what the drummer thinks. I'm gonna ask you a question first, okay? What do you do when the bass player is rushing the time?
Either I go with him or I try to like.
So how do
down,
you
yeah.
so how do you do the second option? How do you try to pull him back?
To pull him back, I just try to stay in tempo and maybe.
You ignore him.
Yeah, right. I ignore him, or I try to.
Yeah. Okay, come on, get on the drums. Come on.
Okay.
I'm gonna mess you up. I'm gonna see if I can do it. Like, then what do you do if the bass player is banned and he's not playing good? You're in trouble, aren't you? Okay, let's see. Come on, help me. Okay, that's how you do it. You have to go to him because he's not listening to you at all, right? Okay, so what I'll do if the drummer is rushing, see if you can rush. I know this kind of goes against your whole thing, but see if you can do it, okay? Let me play a bass line. Hey, that's how Nouveau Soul got started, right? You ignored me on purpose, but usually if I pull myself that far back, he goes, wait, what's wrong? What's wrong? And then you can get him to pay attention, you know? And you look at him like, okay, one more time for Simon, by the way. Give it up for Simon, y'all. Okay, last question. Last question. Where? Oh, okay, sorry.
Do you remember the first bass line you ever learned?
Ain't no sunshine when she's gone. It's not fun. Man, it's so easy and it's so cool. Here's a hard part. Sunshine when she's gone. She's always gone too long. Anytime she goes away. Man, I thought I was the baddest dude in the world. I was 12 years old. Woo. What happened was I was in a little singing group, and the bass player was in the backing band. And after we did our 3 songs, the bass player said, I want to sing a song. I saw you fooling around with the bass. Here, you play bass. Ain't no sunshine. Let's go. And he just went, okay. All right, I'm good. I'm good. And I knew the other part comes, I don't know which one of these frets. Whoo. I'm home. Woo. Then I started going, what's up, girl? Hey, thank you, man. It's been a pleasure to hang out with you guys. Thank you very much. One more time for these incredible musicians. Thank you very much. And thank you to Thomann for doing this. And thank you for all of their support. Thank you to Sire Bass. And thank you for Mark Bass. Okay, we'll see you later. Take care.